Hi, this is Dr. Mike, and I want to spend some time today talking about Chapter 10 as a way of an introduction. Most of my lectures are fairly short, but they are meant to kind of ground you a little bit as you begin to read. As I've said before, some of these chapters are kind of like concrete. They're kind of hard to read. Others are very important, and they're a lot easier to read. I think this one on euthanasia will be one that you definitely will want to take into account in your nursing career, because it will be something that you will deal with in patients and their families. And so I think it's very helpful for you to think about the ethics involved in the idea of helping your patients as they exit this world. And that's quite a big challenge, and a very great place for you to be with your empathy and your skills. As a caregiver, you want to be there for for the family and for the patient. And so it's a good idea for you to kind of examine your ethics as we look at this. One of the important things is that we all have a worldview, that we look at things differently than other people. It may be guided by religion, as we've seen. It may be guided by your grandmother's teachings, the wisdom of your family. Whatever it is, you have a certain worldview. You may not have any of those things directing you, but by the same token, you may also find that it's very helpful to think about these things before you kind of encounter them. We want to discuss the differences among the various forms of euthanasia. Euthanasia basically means a good death. It's a transition from this life. And so there's a lot of different ways that is done, are considered. Some of them are legal, some of them are not legal, some are ethical, or some are not ethical. And we want to kind of look at the criteria for determining death, which has changed a great deal since the 1800s. And then we will talk about some end of life decisions and things that are good for you to consider even in your life. Not many years ago, probably at the end of the 90s, the idea of physician assisted suicide became a very prominent thing. A doctor by the name of Jack Kevorkian, who we'll mention again, set up a van in which he would come to your house and help you off yourself if you needed to because of medical conditions or whatever. That was illegal, and he ended up spending the rest of his life and dying in prison. But there are certain states in the union now that allow euthanasia, and so it's become a bigger and bigger deal. You don't hear as much about it today as you did once, but it's still out there, and it's still a lot of people that want to talk about that. It is impacted greatly by religion, and we'll talk about that some as well. So let me pull up my slides as we begin our discussion to talk about this very, very important subject. And it's one that I think that you will want to think about as you go through your training in your career. So euthanasia is, by definition, it means a good death, helping people to exit as painlessly as possible and helping them to come to terms with dying is a big part of a caregiver's job. There are lots of times at which euthanasia is not just for elderly people. It can be for infants. It can be for disabled newborns. There have been a lot of times when babies were born so terribly physically handicapped or mentally handicapped that they were going to have a poor quality of life. And so they sometimes are allowed to expire that way. The problem is that we have a problem determining what is a quality of life, how good a quality their life is. And then you have the problem of medical treatment. Who decides whether to provide or deny, and what are the reasons for doing one or the other? I took care of my mother for 13 years with Alzheimer's, and at the end, she had lost her ability to speak and lost her ability to walk. And she began having UTIs, one right after the other. And by the time it showed on her face that she was in pain, she had been in pain, it was torture. And it was just every week in and out of the hospital with another UTI. And we finally had to make the decision just to let her go, because she was literally had no quality of life, and she was literally, being tortured slowly. So, that was a very difficult decision for us. As I said at the beginning, the criterion for death has changed a good bit over the last 100 years, say, about when does death occur and what does it mean to be kept alive artificially. We now have the technology to keep someone living for extended periods of time. I won't say indefinitely, because I think the body begins to break down with that after a while. But there are people that are in a comatose vegetative state, which is different, that are not considered dead and that they are still living. 100 years ago, people, to determine if someone died, might hold a feather in front of their nose to see if there's any breathing. We came to understand since then that your human body can shut down to the point to where there's hardly any breathing at all. And so that's not a very good judge of death. We now talk about brain death, when brain activity ceases. That's now the legal determination of death, when a person has permanently lost all detectable brain function. But there are people in comas, persistent vegetative states, that are not considered dead. 90s, there was a case, a girl named Patricia Shalvo in Florida, who was in a PBS, and her parents had to go to court and try to get her off of life support and just let her go. And that's one of the realities of life support, is that once a person's on it, it almost takes a court order to get them off. And that's a very long, drawn out case. In that case, it went on for months. And finally, when they were allowed to remove her from life support, she actually lived another 6 weeks or so before she expired. But there are a lot of legal determinations and a lot of things that are involved in euthanasia that it would help you to be aware of as a nurse. This is one of those areas where sometimes you have to bite your tongue till your tongue bleeds, because you don't get to put your 2 cents worth in with a family or with a person that is dying. I've known patients asking nurses to kill them. That would be a definite violation of ethics. And so it's really hard to be dealing with people that are, those of you that are CNAs or STNAs, you deal with this every day. You deal with people that are in the last stages of life. And it takes a lot of guts. It takes a great person to work in those facilities. And I take my hat off to you, because I've been there as a pastor for 20 years in nursing homes and hospitals and funeral homes. And I know a lot about what it takes to work there. And I appreciate you doing that. That is a commendable job. The different kinds of euthanasia: passive is stopping or not starting treatment. That is not prohibited by law. My stepfather actually did that when he was told he's going to have to go on dialysis with his diabetes. He'd already lost a leg and looked like he was going to lose another one, and he just chose not to have treatment and just went quietly. About 2 weeks, and he was gone. But that is not against the law. Active is administering a lethal drug or using other means that causes a person's death. That's what Jack Kevorkian was doing with his van. And of course, that's prohibited in the United States. Voluntary euthanasia is causing the death with the patient's consent. There are lots of cases in the paper that you'll see where 2 senior citizens, one has Alzheimer's and the other one will help them die. And of course, they get charged. Not many of them get sentenced, any lengthy sentences, but it is a very traumatic thing for a person to have to help their partner die. Non-voluntary, that is causing the death of a patient who's unable to consent. Sometimes that's done. Believe it or not, there are people that work in nursing homes that they consider themselves an angel of death, and they dispatch people for, they dispatch people without their consent. Involuntary, causing death in violation of the person's consent, of course, would be probably considered murder if it can be proven. Physician-assisted suicide helps the patient commit suicide, usually indirect or through prescriptions of potential lethal medication. If I'm not mistaken, if that law hasn't changed in states like Washington State, a doctor can literally write a prescription through the mail or whatever of a medication that would help with that. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, condemns suicide as a violation of the categorical imperative. Those of you that may be Catholic, I think the Catholic Church finds suicide to be a mortal sin, one that you can't get forgiveness of. And so that's a pretty strange thing. I'm a Baptist and a Protestant pastor, and we weren't that stringent, but we did, we consider suicide a sin, but not a sin that would keep you out of heaven. So the American Medical Association opposes physician-assisted suicide naturally. And there's a lot of connection. We're going to talk about abortion next, there's a lot of connection between the ethics related to euthanasia and abortion and right to life, that kind of stuff that you hear a great deal about. And so when you come up, when you decide on your ethical position of both of these, you're going to find some things that connect together. So as we look at that, there's another aspect of this too, and that's pain medication that connects to this in a certain way, given to gravely ill dying patients. That's called palliative care, palliative sedation. And it's a case where the pain is so great that the medication relieves the pain, but it can also hasten death. It will kill the patient. That's true of morphine. Morphine is a palliative care that's given for very, very painful diseases, and it will ultimately end the patient's life. The principle of double effect that is kind of wordy, but it means to do something that's morally permissible for the purpose of achieving some good, even if it can cause harm. And that's what we think about when we think about morphine, that you are helping the patient with their pain. It's going to kill them, but you are doing some good along the way. And so that's where that comes from. In euthanasia, we consider things like, promise, the reasonable measures. Is there any promise of hope of benefit? Does the person have a chance of surviving? Extraordinary measures can be burdensome. They're against the hope of benefit. And then, you have to distinguish one from the other. That's one of the problems that you as a nurse and me as a pastor kind of find ourselves in. We're there with the family, but we don't need to be making that decision for them. It's amazing to me how much guilt comes out in the final hours of a person's life with the family. Maybe it's their mom or dad. They haven't done anything for them. They haven't shown them any attention. You guys that work in nursing homes know that there's some people never see their children until they're dying. And then they all flock in thinking there's money or whatever. And they all want $100 worth of say on a nickel offering, so they have to work that out themselves. It can divide a family and destroy a family, but it's something that we can't get involved in. It's above our pay grade. I mean, doctors can talk to families and try to see some sense. And, as a pastor, I tried to talk in general ways, but I never got to the point, because they will blame you. Once it's over, you'll be the blame for what was done. So you don't want to do that. You will read through it. I'm not going to read these to you, but there are different types of euthanasia here that are just variations of word meanings. But it is making a moral judgment, in a sense, about the voluntariness of, the consequences. Actions and decisions always have consequences. And then, we have different norms today probably than we had 100 years ago. And you're going to read that with these different philosophers here that are at the end of the chapter. They're going to talk about the different moral attributes and things that go along with this. But making, to me, I mean, as a pastor, I've seen lots of people die in my years. There's some worse things than dying. I think that not knowing who you are, not having any quality of life, is much worse to be alive than to be dead. Because whatever our hopes and aspirations are for the life after this are none whatsoever. Just to be at peace and not be suffering and not be without your mind. My mother, for 13 years, I dealt with her with absolutely, her mind was gone. My mother's a brilliant lady before she got Alzheimer's, and it was so painful. I had 2 ischemic strokes trying to take care of her. It was a major problem. So this is a chapter. Let me encourage you to read it as a nurse, understand it, think about it, because you're going to deal with it every day, and you may have already dealt with it with your own family members, but you do need to kind of know where you stand, and you also realize that you'll one day you'll be family, one day you'll be dealing with brothers and sisters, and so let me encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.